Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Polynesian Eyes podcast.
Name things in relationship to their function. Put things in place in relationship to their significance in the hierarchy of being. Orient all named things upward. Sequence, constrain, organize, and order. The manifestation of the patriarchal spirit. And what does God decide? That's not good enough. Man lacks a helper. Man needs a helper. Woman's created as a consequence because the order that men...
And we would say woman is formed because woman was already created before. But
Correct.
Now that Adam is formed, and here's the interesting thing. The insight that the scriptures tell us is, remember, Adam is giving purpose to everything, and he's making them, and then he's obviously working on creating what he made, and eventually it'll manifest itself physically. As Adam is going through that, he never says, this is a good helper for me. He goes through all the animals and he makes things for them, but he clearly understands none of those are sufficient for me. So he's giving everything roles, but none of them have the role of that's the one for me. And so I think that what that is saying to me is Adam is going about doing his work and he's studying animals, and he's also just saying, yeah, but that's not something that's for me, but it'll fit here, and this will be good for that, and this. And so what I'm getting to is Adam, it's like he's doing this work and he's not selling himself short. And I'm not trying to present some weird ideas about the animals. What I'm saying is it could be saying, just like in this life, through our choices, we could sell ourselves short of our divine destiny, right? So is Adam. Adam is doing everything that he should be doing because why? He's progressing, he's doing his work. And it's almost like because he's done his responsibility, has been obedient, and he's been using the talents and the skills that God gave him, God now says it's not good that he be alone because why? He's done everything that he should be doing. He needs additional help. The question now becomes, why does he need additional help? Because he's able to manage the animals and everything that's going on over well. Well, obviously it's because God sees something that Adam doesn't see. And so God is saying he needs help. And we talked about it a little bit with the tree of life, but we'll kind of talk this through. And then when we get closer to it, I'll pause it and I'll share a thought with you and see what your thoughts are. But anything to add to that, Mussy, or continue?
No. I mean, pretty much to my understanding, that's why Eve was created last, correct? After animals, everything was all done, not created, sorry, formed last, because they were created at the same time.
Yes.
But it was the last one to be formed because only God saw that there was a fit to form a woman.
Yes. And it's like Adam was obedient and did the work he was supposed, and the reward for Adam, because he did everything that he was supposed to do, was Eve. That is the blessing for the work that he did. And that blessing becomes extremely critical.
Produce, because of their limitations, is insufficient. And something has to be introduced to speak for that which is not included. That's the role of woman. That's the biblical role of the woman. It's the biological role of the mother. You know this in your own household. Women bring the concerns of the marginalized to the center. You can think about that politically. It's useful to think about it politically. All established human orders exclude. The exclusion causes pain. The pain of exclusion requires a voice. That's the voice of the eternal mother. That's where Genesis 1 ends. Genesis 2 contains the story of Adam.
See, in his mind, Adam and Eve in Genesis 1 are already created, because that's why he says they're two different stories.
Yeah.
Eve.
Okay.
It's another creation story.
See,
It's commensurate with the first one. It's a variation on a theme.
Mm.
God creates Adam out of matter, earth, and breath, spirit. Why? Because that's what human beings are. We're material creatures that are animated. Anima means spirit. What's the spirit? The spirit is
and once again, the spirit is what was created in the previous creation account. This is why it's a continuation. But obviously, for our viewers, the concrete evidence is in Moses 1 and in Moses 2. God tells Moses, write down the things that I tell you.
Mm.
So a lot of people assume that Moses is seeing a vision. He's seeing the earth and stuff being made and created. But when you read the book of Moses as translated by Joseph, it's very clear God is dictating this story. So it's a continuation. And the fact that it's been translated by a prophet of God and inserted that language, to me, makes me feel relatively comfortable to say this was one continuation, because it was dictated in one single event between
Mm.
Moses and God.
Nice.
living organizing principle of the material. And human beings are an amalgam of the living organizing principle and the material. And that's what's portrayed in the creation of Adam.
And that's, this is what's amazing about what Jordan Peterson is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Without access to a lot of the scriptures and the doctrine that we haven't. Look at he's like, just circling. He's like he's so close. He's just tapping. He maybe just be kind of touching it, but he hasn't grasped the entire concept. But he's just getting so close to it. It's actually amazing when I listen to him, because I'm like, man, if this guy can get so close like that and he doesn't even believe and have access to the information we have, well, boy, do we have a lot of ground to make up, because this guy's making us look bad.
Yeah. No, good point, Duan. Good point.
The combination of matter and spirit, the combination of material and conscious. You could think about it that way if you're more secular minded.
And once again, that comes back to why I really believe it is Adam's role to bring into order, by exercising the godly creative process of make, create, and formed, to bring the physical world into order, because the physical world has not been completed fully yet. And that's Adam's, that's the tending to the garden and to the earth. It's bringing order to the physical world.
We're conscious matter. Like, what's up with that? No one understands that. No materialist understands that. We understand nothing about consciousness. It's as mysterious now as it's been throughout the entire course of our existence. It's never been reduced to a material phenomenon. We have no idea what that would even mean. And if we did reduce it to the material, all that would mean was that we inadvertently elevated the material. We treat each other like we're conscious. We presume from first principles that we're conscious. We can't even distinguish between being itself and being conscious. And so that's a perfectly reasonable representation of man. Woman is taken from man, from a rib, from the side, as an equal. There's a critique of patriarchal Judaism.
Before he goes into that, there's actually multiple interpretations of that.
Of what? The rib of Adam being removed to create Eve?
Yeah, like some say rib, some say like the side, right? It can be interpreted as a whole side. Some can interpret it as a halving, like half of Adam, whether it's like half of the human family is divided. And that one of the things that I think it could be all of those. That's the thing about the scriptures. It could have so many layers of meaning. But one of the things that I think, and this is kind of related to the story of the tree and why the tree in the Garden of Eden and why the tree of life is always kind of described as a feminine, is it is a splitting of the power and authority or capacity of Adam
Mm.
into two. And this becomes, and then I'll explain why I think that's important. And one of the drivers is Adam, in our belief, Adam does not forget who he is until God causes him to sleep and then the ribs taken out, right? In our belief, we believe that that's when he forgets everything. In Hebrew kind of mythology, sleep is associated with revelation, right? A lot of the dreams stuff. And one of the things that seems to be a potential interpretation could be this. So when Adam is put to sleep, it's like God reveals something to him. And what God is revealing to him is the necessity of the split. Is like he's saying, hey, Adam, you're doing great. You're doing everything great. It's like you're doing too good and you're not going to achieve the goal that I had from the beginning.
Mm.
So when God says it's not good, he's not saying it's not good because Adam is not obeying him. What he's saying is, if we keep things as they are, the purpose that I have developed from the beginning may not be realized. And then it's only at that he says, he needs the woman. And so there seems to be a splitting because like it says, it's a halving of Adam. And God says that once that halving happens, the man is not without the woman or the woman is not without the man. It's not complete. So I take the interpretation of there's this splitting of capacity between the two beings. And it becomes very critical. And we'll talk about it when he gets closer to the fall as to why I believe that splitting was critical.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Judeo-Christian narrative from the resentful feminist side that makes the claim that the biblical narrative is, for example, radically patriarchal in its orientation, dooming women to subjugation. That's a preposterous claim, by the way. It's not only false, it's false in a very particular way. There are falsehoods that are approximations of the truth. There are falsehoods so deep that they're the exact opposite of the truth. And the truth of the matter is that right from the first words, the biblical library is miraculous in its insistence that women, like men, are made in the image of God. That emerges in the first chapter. And that Eve is the equal of Adam in every manner, although complementary and not identical. And our society is riven by conflict so deep that we now doubt both of those propositions. There's no form of confusion more profound than that. Sexually reproducing creatures without nervous systems can tell the difference between male and female. I'm dead serious about that. If you can get people to swallow the lie that there's no difference between men and women, there is no lie they won't swallow. Right.
Interesting point.
So God makes Adam and Eve, each with their own role, and he puts them in the garden to play forever under the watchful eye of their heavenly Father. And he tells them they have free reign in the garden with everything delightful that's being created, except for one thing. They're not to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. So what does that mean? Man, that's a mystery.
Question.
I spent a long time trying to crack the micro-narratives in the story of Adam and Eve, and it wasn't until 3 or 4 years ago that I think I started to understand that particular fragment of the story. A friend of mine is here, Jonathan Pajot. Some of you might have been following him. Jonathan and his brother Matthew really helped me crack this. And so we're here. I'm here with Jonathan and a number of my other colleagues and friends right now with the Daily Wire recording another seminar. We released an Exodus seminar. We're recording a seminar on the Gospels right now. We're about 60% of the way through that. And so, just so you know, that's also forthcoming. God tells human beings, he makes one fundamental rule. Do not eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, that's moral knowledge. That should be self-evident, knowledge of good and evil. That's moral knowledge. Moral knowledge is predicated on the idea that there's an upward path and a downward path, that there are desirable things and that there are undesirable things, and that at the pinnacle of what's desirable is what's heavenly or paradisal, and in the abysmal depths of what's undesirable is the diabolical and the hellish. And that's the moral landscape. That's the landscape of good and evil. That's the fictional landscape. Fictional in the sense of characterization and plot. Fictional in the sense of distilled truth, not falsehood. Fictional in the sense that the fiction describes the structure through which you see the world. Fiction as the deepest form of truth. What does it mean to eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil? When Nietzsche announced the death of God in the late 1800s, he said something that he believed would constitute a pathway forward. He said, "We have dispensed with God. We are the greatest murderers who ever lived. We've engaged in a murder so profound that will never wash away the blood. How could we possibly conduct ourselves in the aftermath of that murder?" You read of Nietzsche as a triumph.
Does that make sense, Mati? Did you see what he's talking about?
No, what is he trying to say?
He's saying that science has progressed so much and the human beings have evolved that we've gotten rid of God. There's no more need for God. So that's why he's saying we've murdered God.
Okay, gotcha.
Triumphant anti-Christian. He was a very complicated person, and he knew perfectly well that the dissolution of the Christian metaphysic would produce a cataclysmic consequence. He predicted in the late 1800s that Europe would turn to a radically resentful, egalitarian communitarianism that would kill tens of millions of people, which is exactly what happened. And he saw that coming just as clearly as his Russian counterpart, Fyodor Dostoevsky, saw it. He knew what would rise in the aftermath of the death of God. He knew that resentment and communitarianism would be one temptation. And he tried to formulate an alternative path. He said, we're going to have to create our own values. We're going to have to take it upon ourselves to create the moral landscape.
Become our own gods. Now that we've eliminated the need for a God, quote unquote, with science, this philosopher's idea is we become the gods.
I read that and I understood why he said that. I could see its influence on clinical psychology, for example, the notion of the self-actualized person, the notion that our soul should unfold in the direction that's commensurate with the deepest understanding of our subjective selves, right? The radical unveiling of subjectivity, self-definition. I am what I say I am, which is a radical claim in our society now. A claim of omniscience. Not only am I who I say I am, you better act like I'm who I am.
See, and this is a corruption of the godly creative process. It is an assumption. It's a misunderstanding that God had already created and had already made and created a spiritual aspect that is the underpinning, the fabric that is embedded in the physical world that we're in. And so when you quote unquote get rid of God, you've gotten rid of the spiritual creation that is the underbelly. That's what's holding up the physical world. Because if God doesn't make it and it's not created spiritually, then it cannot exist physically. And so what happens is, at least with Adam, he is under the direction and is following and is being inspired by God the Father and Jehovah to exercise the make and the create and the form in accordance to what he's been directed to do. Right? What happens is, what he's saying there is, when you get rid of God, that God doesn't exist, and all you see is this temporal world, you then start to say, well, I'm going to make something. I'm going to declare myself. Then I'm just going to think it really hard and create it and then form it physically in the real world that it is now. But that will not function in the reality that God has already created and given everything a purpose, including you. And so when you don't follow your purpose, then you are, quote unquote, going against the will of God. This is why we try to submit our will to God's will, because we're trying to understand what is the purpose that you made for me, the purpose that you created me for, the purpose that you formed me, so that I can execute that power of creation myself in accordance to what you want. If any thoughts on that, any
No,
questions?
yeah, no, yeah, no. I was just thinking when you say with the corruption, when all you see is temporal things, and that's what's causing the civil unrest in a lot of Western countries,
Yes.
because you can identify whatever you want to be, and then rely on
Science.
man created science to make it a reality, and that causes unrest because
Correct.
that is not a sustaining spiritual and physical in the way that God created you for your purpose.
100%. Yeah.
So when you do that, that causes civil unrest, and it also causes chaos. And we know when chaos happens, you self-destruct.
100%.
So
And
that's
that's,
that,
and
that's my
yeah,
thought. That's my thought.
no, I agree. And that's why it's so important. That's why the spiritual creation and the making is so critical, because why?
Mm,
That's what holds up the temporal. And when
mm,
you forget that and you disconnect from God,
mm,
then you think you're disconnected from the order that has been made. You got to remember, this order did not come into existence on its own. It was chaos. And
mm,
God was the one who brought the order,
mhm,
the making and the creating that keeps the forming process together. And when you go against that, you're creating that chaos and that destruction. You're causing decay.
mm,
Okay? But our responsibility and role is to continue the order
mhm.
by following the pattern that's been given to us and the authority that's been given to us from God. But when we deviate from that, we think we're making order, but all we're doing is decaying things, and things fall apart on us.
Yeah, yeah.
I say I am. That's the claim of the radical subjective. Well, what's wrong with that claim? Well, the psychoanalysts criticized Nietzsche very effectively. They said, look, how are you going to create your own values when you're not master in your own house? Have you tried telling yourself what to do? How does
This
that
is a
work for
good
you?
point.
I know, you're just your own obedient servant, right? You're so morally pure. You just tell yourself at New Year's that you're going to go to the gym and you're going to diet and you're going to be some stellar physique, lean, mean fighting machine by March, and you go once, and then you tell yourself lies about why you don't have to go again, and that's the end of that. And if you were capable of creating your own values, you wouldn't be the banner, the tattered banner that blows in the wind of its own whims. The psychoanalysts figured this out very quickly. You're a war of competing whims. And a creature like that's going to have a very difficult time navigating the complex landscape of the ultimate moral pronouncement. And who are you to make a decision about what constitutes good and evil? And that's what God
Mm,
tells men and women. It's like, you don't get to create the moral order, you get to dwell within it. You get to align yourself with the pre-existent
Mhm.
moral order. You do not take to yourself the right, the presumption.
And it's more than just the moral order, in my opinion. It
mhm,
is the spiritual and the making reality. It's not just a moral order. It He's using that word, and I understand what he's saying, but what I'm kind of getting into is there is a spiritual and something behind even the spiritual that is making the order that we see in the physical world today.
okay.
To define good and evil themselves. You bow your head to good and you pray for deliverance from evil. And if you violate that, look the hell out. And that's the pronouncement. And so what happens? The serpent offers Eve the fruit. Why the serpent? Well, the serpent is camouflaged. The serpent is crafty, subtle. The serpent is marginalized. The serpent is the voice of pride. The serpent is Lucifer. That's the metaphysical surrounding of the story that develops over centuries, the notion that the serpent in the Garden of Paradise is Lucifer himself, the spirit of pride. What does that mean? It's prideful presumption that makes you assume that you can define the moral order. What's the prideful presumption of Eve at the beginning of time and forever? I can even clasp the serpent to my breast. It's the careless welcoming in of the monstrous and prideful under the guise of the pretension of maternal compassion. And if you can't see
Interesting
that happening in our
interpretation. I've
society,
never
you're
heard
blind.
of that until this.
It might be easy to just
Mm.
toss all of your discipline to the side for the summer, but a life of greatness doesn't happen by taking the easy route. The Hallow app offers an incredible range of guided meditations and
And what's the sin of Adam? Well, what do men care about? Women care about, properly, about the helpless infant. It's a powerful feminine virtue, and it can be inverted and made prideful and trumpeted and presumptuous to infantilize the world and to advertise that compassion as a badge of worth and honor, as a mode of attaining status. What's Adam's sin? What do men care about? Impressing women. Men are ambitious fundamentally to impress women, for better or for worse. What's the prideful pathway and false pathway to establishing a relationship with the too demanding feminine? I've got it. Anything you want, dear. Right, and that's Adam's sin. Eve hearkens to the voice of the serpent and clutches it to her breast, despite the clear injunction from the divine never to do that. And Adam weakly does exactly what the worst part of his wife wants. And so here we are, folks.
There's a couple things there. Any thoughts? Masi?
I think, yeah, I've kind of had a couple thoughts. So you can help me understand. So he's saying that women, Eve, that's representing the women, that women tend to care for the marginalized in the guise of compassion. Is that kind of what he's trying to say?
Yes.
That when we
That's his
use too much
position.
compassion and stuff, that we can also get hurt ourselves.
Correct.
That's kind of like the attributes of the woman. Okay, yeah, no, and that's why God, when He created, right, and created us, well, make and then created, and then Christ forming us with companionships, because that's definitely a thing that a feminine or your spouse would definitely tell you to be more compassionate. And at the same time, that's why it's important to have a, and it's even with rearing up children. That's why there's a lot of social issues when there's no father in the home, or a father figure in the home, because there's times with the fathers, like, will have that input of saying, no, just do this, and this is the right thing to do, and you just kind of move forward, right? And there's times that the women is right, that you got to have more compassion, that the men need to follow, right?
Yeah.
In order to grow or be nearer to God, in a sense, because you gotta have that. So yeah, that's what I was thinking too. But also with the that compassion is definitely hitting a lot of Western countries, in a sense. They're
Yeah.
taking they've always said some of these guilts of not helping the poor, or not providing, um, or not like eradicating poverty, but they're creating all these laws and stuff that tax heavily on the working class to try to help the poor, when it's really negatively affecting the people who are trying to be independent or be more self-sufficient for the family. Kind of, that's what I'm kind of thinking here. So I don't know if I'm going on the right thing.
Yeah.
And then it creates, then this position
An
creates
imbalance.
imbalance of more government overreach that is telling you what to do, instead of the mother figure and the father figure trying to figure out what's good for their family, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's when I was thinking. And the there was another one. There's another one that I was thinking, but yeah, that initially that's one of my thoughts. Maybe the other
Yeah,
thing
maybe
that I
it'll
was
come
gonna
up.
talk
I'll
about
share a
later.
couple of things, and then when that thought comes back, first
Okay.
things to kind of point out is Adam and Eve don't sin, and
Mm,
and there's a reasoning behind that.
mm,
Um, Sinning requires a understanding, a moral understanding of what is intrinsically right and intrinsically wrong in a more complex manner. And what I mean by that is you have to understand what the punishment is,
mm,
right? And what the reward is. I'm not sure that Adam and Eve knew what death was, right? And they didn't know the consequence. This is why Lucifer was able to deceive Eve, um, is because, in my opinion. So the first thing is Adam and Eve couldn't have sinned because they don't have full knowledge of the consequences. They did have an understanding of the expectation, right?
mm.
And they were in many ways, like they said, they were beguiled, they were tricked. So there seems to be an uneven playing field because Adam and Eve are, you know, their memories are wiped. They're in a enclosed garden, a very protected area, and they are trying to learn and grow and progress within this little sandbox, right?
Mm,
Lucifer shows up and he knows all things and he's presenting certain
mm.
ideas, like we've talked from the tree of
Yeah.
life, that puts it at a disadvantage. And it's not necessarily sin, but it is clearly disobedience. You can disobey something and have a
Yeah.
consequence, but that's not sin. Sin
Mm,
is something that is a little bit more. And we, Alma 42, I think, is a great way to kind of understand that, and that's something that maybe one day we'll talk about, Masi. But coming back to Adam and Eve, is that there seems to be a split here in my perspective, and it is so God has Adam and Eve, and then He splits them, right? Adam is very much a what you call an image of justice. Adam's pretty straightforward. God said no, so we
mm,
never do that, right? That seems to be his driving motive. Eve, being on the feminine side, is more merciful,
mm. Yeah.
right? And so what merciful does is merciful sometimes kind of tries to look beyond justice and say, "Oh,
Mm,
but how about this?" And and
mm,
and it seems like Lucifer knows this. And
mm.
he's
Good
trying to
point.
this is why he tries to tempt Adam, and Adam's like, "Hey, I ain't having it." So he
Mm,
goes to Eve, and he's taking advantage of Eve's kind of, because remember, they split.
yes.
God is a God of justice
Mm.
and a God of mercy.
Yeah.
So Lucifer comes to Eve because that's kind of seems what
Her
the
makeup
the
is like.
female,
Yes.
yes, the woman kind of brings that to the table, like you're
Yes.
saying. And Lucifer is kind of using that to his advantage, and also her lack of understanding, and also, like we talked about, that little addition of neither should you touch it or you will die. So there's a combination of misinformation of some sort,
Mm,
right, and a nature of nurture that Lucifer's taking care of, and that's how he has her partake of the fruit. Then that's how, and then she goes and gets Adam. But you notice the ultimate goal wasn't necessarily to get Eve. The ultimate goal was to get Adam.
correct.
And the question is, well, why? And so one of the things that I can think of is the commandment was given, according to the scriptures, to Adam. The scriptural record says Adam cannot eat of the fruit. That seems to be where the
Mm,
covenant is made. We don't have a scriptural record that says Eve was also commanded not to. Besides the fact that if Adam was already in the garden, he's told, don't eat of the fruit, but it's up to you. Well, what would naturally happen when Eve comes at the very end? Hey, God said we can do whatever we want in the garden, but don't eat of the fruit. And so, if that is the case, then when Eve eats of the fruit, she's not necessarily under condemnation with God. She is just that discussion is between Adam and Eve, because the only scriptural record we have is Adam was commanded not to eat of the fruit. So there's a real possibility that if Adam, this is my opinion, if Adam, the mistake that Eve made was she went and made a decision without talking to Adam. But then she comes to Adam and says, hey man, hey, I made this decision. What are we going to do? Then Adam makes the same mistake that Eve made. He makes a decision without talking to God. And that's literally what the scripture says. Because thou obeyed the counsel of thy wife. Right? That's where the issue is coming from. Meaning, you made an independent decision, Eve. You came to Adam. Adam made the same mistake. And then now we're in a position where we have this problem that we're in. And so
no, I was just thinking, Tua. So you're saying if Eve just partake of the apple and Adam did it, the continuation of where they're at, it would have continued because it'd be easily rectified because that's not the covenant that God had.
That's my thought process. Yes.
That makes sense. Okay.
Because it is no different than if you have a member of a marriage who one is in the temple and makes temple covenants and the other one doesn't keep the temple covenants. Well, that the other partner didn't make those covenants, so they're not under the same condemnation as the one who has been directed with that covenant. And unless there's more scriptures that clarifies that, but from the scriptures we see, the only scriptural reference is Adam, don't eat of the fruit. There are other representation of it in other areas that suggest otherwise, but when we're just talking about purely the scriptures are relatively clear on that.
No, interesting. No, and that is interesting, and that's why when Jordan Peterson did mention of what's men's weakness or the answers that we do is impress, and he was just, Adam was trying to impress Eve or something, and just kind of went with it without, like what you said, kind of counsel with God, and that was kind of like the fall when it kind of happened. So
yeah, I mean, and that's and this is, I mean, I don't know. We don't, and I'm just going off the scriptures. I understand in other places we have other ideas that are presented. But in the scriptures, it is implied that Adam and Eve are commanded to multiply and replenish, but it is not expressed in the scriptures. The commandment to multiply and replenish is in the creation phase, the create phase, in the spiritual phase.
Yeah.
In the physical phase, they were told, go and take care of the garden. Right? And so that seems to be, to me, and be obedient and take care of the garden. However, it is implied that they were to multiply and replenish, because why? We are told that they were married celestially in the garden. And then we could imply from that what's the primary goal of a celestial marriage? Continuation of the seed. So we can get that implication that because they were married by God in the garden, the intent was to multiply and expand the temporal forming of children. But scripturally, it is not expressed in the form portion of it.
Oh no, the other
did
thing,
the idea come up?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking when he said, and that's why I've never been well, I think it could be maybe other faiths, but I know for ours it's quite popular to say that your wife is always right, kind of thing. And And then when you bring up when we talk about some of the natural reaction of a woman that can cause issues, that's why it's important to have the role of the male's perspectives, because and that's why it's so important that they counsel together, and it's much stronger when you navigate life together, because God created us in ways that we view things that are beneficial for both. So
Yes.
and that's why yes, and that's why to me I've never been a fan of that kind of comment, or like your wife, because I feel like if that's the case, and if that's the case, then that means that there will be a lot of chaos and issues that'll be rising up. But that's to me, that's what I've always thought. Well,
Yeah.
because like what you said, like women will always have that perspective and very merciful in the guise of some, it's almost like a wolf dressed up in a clothing of a sheep. That
Mhm.
people will take advantage of that, and sometimes you're gonna need a perspective of a male perspective to say no, or to just move on, kind of thing. Or I don't know. That's what I'm just kind of thinking, but I'm just thinking
No,
out
I
loud.
I
But
I I think
it's
that seems
perfect
to make
example.
sense. One of the things I do want to bring up is obviously God wanted male and female because he created them in the spiritual phase,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
What I'm coming back to is, when God sees Adam, he's doing everything right, but then God says it's not good that he is alone.
yeah.
And then we come back to this idea. So though Eve caused, and here, let me put it this way. God knew that he was going to add male and female. And I believe as Adam's progressing, he gets that blessing, because obviously women are one of the greatest blessings we have,
Correct.
because without them, we can't achieve our ultimate goal. But what I'm getting to is the introduction of Eve provides a certain level of chaos into the ordered garden,
Okay.
right? Because of what we're talking about. But that's where the opportunity is. It's like we're talking about on day one. God sees this chaos. He sees the dragon and the chaos that's in the depth on day one. On day one, he sees something, and
Mm,
he's saying, I have a plan to get. He sees the chaos means opportunity, right? We see chaos as always a bad thing,
mm,
but the truth is chaos means there's an opportunity
opportunity. Mm,
if you can do it right. Chaos means risk. Chaos means there's potential bad things that could happen. However, if you know how to navigate it and handle it, then there's an opportunity for greatness there. And
mm,
this is before men and women are created and before
correct.
men and women are formed. So to me, it's like he introduced Eve as a trap for Lucifer, because he already knows the intent of Lucifer. And he
Yeah.
already knows, if I leave Adam alone, he's
It'll be
never,
easy.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, he will never depart. Like,
Yeah.
though that's a good thing, but it also doesn't seem to be in alignment with what God saw on day one.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he specifically creates male and female to divide that power. And then when it comes physically, he adds in the woman. The woman is the opportunity for Lucifer
Mm,
to come in and cause the chaos that happens. But it's also the opportunity for the Savior to come to the earth. This is why the tree of life is always portrayed as the feminine, because that is the vehicle by which God provides his mercy.
mm,
Because why? The covenant was with Adam. And so Adam is under condemnation and in association with Eve, but that covenant wasn't necessarily broken with Eve, in my opinion, because she never technically made it. And so she becomes a vessel
mm.
that God can use to bring in the Savior of the world, or the woman.
Yes.
So yes, she is the quote unquote the weakness, but it's also the solution. So
To bring
the
that savior.
appear
Yeah.
exactly. So the appear that's why Jesus appears weak by the world, because why? He is the arm of mercy. And in the world, with the law, it is justice that has the arm of strength.
Mm.
And so the extension of Jesus appears weak to the world, but that's also the way by which God overcomes the mistakes that we've made overall. So it is a counter punch, and I believe it was a trap set for Lucifer, because God knew Lucifer was going to take
Tempt.
advantage of that, but God said, trust me, you don't want to, because you're going to get it. But Lucifer couldn't help himself, and he got it. If that makes sense.
No, good point. No, good point.
Let's see here. Hopefully, I mean, we'll continue here. It's almost done.
So what's the consequence of that? Well, the scales fall from their eyes and they notice they're naked. And they're deeply ashamed and they cover up. They become self-conscious. Okay, so when do people become self-conscious? When they make prideful errors. When you overreach and you reveal your inadequacy as a consequence of the mismatch between your pride and your ability, you'll be ashamed. You'll recognize your insufficiency. You'll be aware of yourself as an isolated entity. That's all to become self-conscious. Psychologists have learned over the last 40 years that there's no difference between being conscious of yourself and being miserable. Those are literally the same thing. If you're living a life of other-centered, communally oriented, hospitable calling, you're not attending to the miseries of your isolated self. If you stay in your bailiwick and you don't put forward your hand presumptuously, you can live in the absence of painful self-consciousness. Pride goes before a fall.
So what I see there, Mussy, is this is why God told Adam and Eve, don't partake of the fruit. The partaking of the fruit, because now the scriptures say that when they ate of the fruit, they could follow their own will. Right? It is, in a sense, the same mistake that we're talking about of one presuming they can make and create themselves not under the complete direction of God. Right? So, because Eve is told, this is, if you eat this is how you become like God, which is in some ways true, but it's also a lie. Because why? If you eat this, but you're in an enclosed environment, an ideal environment, that who made and created and formed? God the Father. And if you want to become like God the Father, then what do you have to do? You have to go to the chaos and create and form a Garden of Eden. This is why they recognize their nothingness. They're like, oh crap. The only reason why I'm in this place and I have all this protection is because why? I'm in the protection and the order that God has made. And if I presume that I will become God on my own, then I have to go out and go into the chaos and develop the chaos on my own. And I know for a fact I cannot do that. It is impossible for me. And that's why they run and hide, and that's why they try to cover themselves. And I agree with his description here is they quickly realize their inability to achieve whatever decision they had made independent of God. Any thoughts, comments on that?
No, nothing right now, Tua.
We have a month devoted to pride in our culture. Right. Pride goes before a fall. You know this in your own life. You can ask yourself, and this has been a Christian conundrum since the beginning of time, is your life miserable because misery is baked into the structure of the world? Or is your life miserable because you do stupid things and refuse to learn and bring endless misery on yourself in your presumption? And you know, you might say a little column A and a little column B, and fair enough. But you certainly know that the most painful episodes of your life come when you claim falsely to be more than you are. And the core narrative in the Judeo-Christian ethos is that the fall of man into the profane world is a consequence of pride. And that is really something worth thinking about. You know, Adam and Eve are called upon to work in misery as a consequence of their pride. Well, could you work joyfully? If you didn't overreach yourself, if you were aiming upward properly, if you were telling the truth, if you were acting communally, if you're acting in relationship to what was highest, would it be possible that your work would be joyful and bring abundance? Isn't there times in your life when that's happened? Is it the case that you move forward in misery in precise proportion to the pretension of your aim? It's worth considering. It's the suspicion that arises at the end of the story that begins history, because it's with the prideful fall of Adam and Eve that history begins. Adam and Eve discover they're naked and they hide. And God comes along and says, Adam, where are you? And Adam says, I'm over here. I'm hiding. And God says, well, why are you hiding? It's a foolish thing to do, right? Because Adam is perfectly aware that God can see through bushes. Adam is hiding from God. Is it your pathetic self-consciousness that makes you hide from God? That's a good question. Are you not everything you could be because you're ashamed of who you are? That's what that story indicates. And so God calls Adam on. He says, who told you? Why are you hiding? And Adam says, well, I'm naked. And God says, well, how did you find out that you were naked? How did you find out that you were inadequate? How did you find out that you are shameful? And Adam says, you know that woman you made me? It's her fault. And that's the second sin of Adam. And that's another indication of the non-patriarchal nature of the text. You know, Eve is the first human being to take a bite of the apple, but Adam follows along. And it isn't obvious to me that the follower of sin is in a worse, better moral position than the initiator. And then he compounds his sin, like men do, by blaming the woman. Why is your life so... Well, if you had my wife, man, you'd know. It's like those damn women. It's like, it's a handy excuse for men all the time to say that, and it's not least because men can't tolerate being rejected by women, and women reject them all the time. And the reason women reject them is because they're not all they should be. And so, of course, that makes men painfully self-conscious and makes them shake their fist at God and makes them hide. And so, well, God says, and so Adam reveals himself in this pathetic manner. It's like he can't even take responsibility for his own misstep. He has to blame the thing that's been granted to him as the highest form of gift. And not only her, but God. Whose fault is it? Well, it's not mine. It's probably women's fault. And if it's not women, it's clearly God. It can't be me. So what happens? Well, both Adam and Eve are condemned to suffer in their work. And that's how history begins. And that's the situation of the fallen world. And that's the description of the landscape of profound fiction that we inhabit. And that's only a tiny fraction of the characterization of God and man in the biblical corpus. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any thoughts? Any thoughts?
Yeah, a couple thoughts of when he says with Adam. I think that is correct with typical of men. I mean, and I'll give some grace on Adam because he was doing everything right. So many times, and then when he made that one mistake, because he's been so right maybe so many times, he blamed it wasn't him and stuff. So, and I can see even when myself, right, I've been doing so good, and then like when I make a mistake because I listened to somebody else and I say, oh, then it's not really me because I listened to this advice and made me to do that, so it's not really my. That is so true for men, and that's a good learning experience. And to me, that re-emphasizes why it's important to always counsel with God, and that's why when you forget that one time, and it's so important to kind of get back on that pathway to always counsel with God, because you won't go wrong there, and making sure that you are keeping your covenant with God, and part of that keeping that covenant is maintaining that communication, through various ways. You can either by attending your local church faith that practices you to worship God the Father and His Son Jesus Christ, or by ceremonial prayers. So there's different ways I was taken by that, because that mistake of the fall happened when pretty much when Adam pretty much did not counsel with God. But that goes for your, your spouse and yourself, that when God is not the forefront of your navigation of this life, that there's going to be, like I think I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a lot of gray areas, and you'll be depending on the wrong sources for that when you make that choice. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's why they always say it's important if you have God as the forefront, and everything else, not your family and other things that you do, God should be the forefront. Because if you mix it up at times, let's just say, if you put family first, right? And then a family member makes a mistake or chooses the wrong way, you can at times feel like they've made a mistake, in a way that you start, what's the word, maybe agreeing with a certain behavior, because you don't want to be casting them too long or whatever. But when you have God as the forefront, God will bless you with the right decision or the right words to say to that individual to
Mm.
bring them closer. So that's what I mean. There's different, because I feel like if you have your priorities wrong and not in the right alignment, and that's why the first commandment says, make sure you love God with all thy might, mind, and strength. So if you have that, you will be blessed, and that's a perfect illustration with the whole um, Adam and Eve situation, especially with as the head of the household. When you're in a partner, when you're in a man and wife, husband and wife
Relationship.
relationship.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why, to me, that's an illustration of why it's important, especially for the head of the household, to always maintain that connection and making sure God is the forefront. But that's what I was just thinking.
No,
If you
and,
get that
and
mixed wrong, there's a lot of gray areas.
well, and that's the thing is, at the end of the day, as the head of the household, you're ultimately responsible, and you cannot delegate that responsibility to anyone else. You own it.
Yes.
That is the scriptures always say the Lord said, "My word is a double-edged sword." That is
Mm,
the double-edged sword of being called to lead the family.
mm,
Is you own it,
mm,
and you better be able to be willing to say, "Yeah, I'm the head of the family, and I am the one that's responsible for everything, even the
mm,
things that quote unquote didn't go your way or
mm,
not according to your thought process." I do want to walk through some of this, just that portion of the serpent, Masi. Is that
mm.
is that okay if we go through
Yeah,
that
go
real
for it.
quick?
Yeah, go for it.
So the reason why I bring this up, and we'll probably have to, might have to do some editing on this to shorten the video. Um,
Is this a serpent that's like, is this off of scripture, or what you're pulling up here?
yeah.
Okay, off of scripture.
So
Okay.
this will be a little bit of a variation of it, though I agree with the overall interpretation that those guys on the Ward Radio did.
Mm-hmm.
If I was in there, I would just ask a few questions to clarify
Mm-hmm.
certain things. This is part of the deception that I believe in could have been happening as well, because look, it says here, after God, they go through the selection of the Savior. Then he talks about the deception that happens, right? And it says, "And now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which I, the Lord God, had made." And then it says, verse 6, "And Satan put it into the heart of the serpent,
Mm,
for he had drawn away many after him." And this is an important piece. And I'm just going to add this because I think this is why the timing is actually incredible. Remember the discussion we had about where I believe the selection in Abraham is between Lucifer and Satan? I
yeah.
mean Lucifer and Adam.
And Adam.
When Lucifer is not selected, it says, "And the second was angry and kept not his first
Angry.
estate, and at that day many followed after him." Okay. So this is why one of the things, so when he was not selected to be Adam, that's the day that some of us started to follow Lucifer. That's the day, because he got angry because he wasn't selected, right? So you say,
Mm.
so on that day, look at what it says in verse 4 of Moses. It says he had already drawn many. Oh, let me change the thing. He had drawn away many after him.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was rejected to be Adam, that's the day he started on the path that he is now, because I believe he felt wronged with Adam
Mm. Mm.
being the first man. Because
Mm.
in Abraham 3, it says it was on that day, the day that he was rejected, that's the day he started to draw people away. When it comes down
Mm.
to Adam and Eve in the garden, it says he had already drawn many after him. And I
Mm.
would say what he is saying here is Satan is using someone else, the serpent, to execute his words. That is the covering and the hiding
Yeah.
is used to Lucifer, and this is a potential interpretation. Lucifer's using someone else to go tempt Eve, even though it's someone else, but it's really him, because why? It says here that Satan put it into the heart of the
Heart.
serpent.
The serpent. So when you say somebody else too, are you saying another follower of Lucifer, or you're talking about the
Correct.
actual? Okay, gotcha. All
That
right.
that he put it into the heart. The serpent is a representative of someone who's trusted, who's educating Adam and Eve in some capacity, has some
Okay.
authority, or appears to have the authority of God.
Mm.
But that's a potential interpretation of that. And
Yeah.
then it goes, and Satan put it into the heart of the serpent, for he had drawn away many after him, and he sought also to beguile Eve. So
Mm.
the goal was, we're going to trick Eve, because
Correct.
we think we've identified a weakness with Eve,
Yeah.
right? For he knew not the mind of God. And this is what I'm saying. God set this up, right? It was like, you think you found a way to destroy my plan, but you don't know what I'm doing. This is day one, the darkness over the water. The water
Mm.
thinks it's hidden. It thinks it's so deep in the water that he doesn't know what's going on. But what God's saying, he's like, dude, I see you, but you don't know what I'm thinking.
Mm.
Okay. And then it says here, wherefore he sought to destroy the
Destroy the
world.
world.
Right. So the whole point of deceiving Eve was to destroy the world.
Correct.
This is one of the reasons why I don't necessarily believe that he knew that eating of the fruit was the only way for us to progress, because the whole point was to destroy the world. Anyways,
Mm.
and he said unto the woman, yea, hath God, and remember, this God is Elohim,
Correct.
hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree in the garden? And he spake, remember, look, and he spake by the mouth of the serpent.
Mm.
And what I'm getting to is, when God says, when his servant speaks, it's as if it is God himself.
Yes.
So
Correct.
this is like his false prophet or false representative that seems to be speaking on behalf of God,
Mm. But it's a
but
behalf
it's
of.
really Lucifer who put it into the heart of the serpent.
Mm.
So the serpent is trying to say, oh yeah, I speak for behalf of God, but it's really Lucifer's words that he gave the serpent.
Mm.
And then it says, and the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden,
Mm-hmm.
but of the fruit of the tree thou beholdest in the midst of the garden, God hath said, and remember, God has said it, but not God has told me, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it. And we don't know where
Lest we die.
this piece comes from,
Correct.
because what we do know is God the Father told, or Jehovah tells Adam, don't eat of the fruit. But
Correct.
somehow she adds in here, neither shall ye touch it lest ye die.
Die.
And
Interesting.
the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. And this is
Hmm.
the question that comes about, is what exactly does die mean? Because does the death doesn't exist in the garden,
Mm.
and possibly not even on earth. So what exactly does die mean? He may not even understand what that is, and maybe Adam doesn't understand is. But they're talking about death, but we have no understanding of death. Death is a function of mortality. And as far as
Mm.
we know, they were not subject to death for whatever reason. And then it says, For God doth know. So he see the serpent is trying to say God's holding you back. For
Mm.
God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods,
Mm.
knowing good and evil. So he's kind of giving the idea to Eve, oh, God's holding you back, right? Like
Mm.
he knows you'll be like God, so that's why he's telling you not. But and then the woman saw that the tree was good for food. Then it became pleasant to the eyes, and the tree to be desired to make her
Wise.
wise. She took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and also gave unto her husband that was with her, and she did eat. So here's my question. How do you know whether something was good to eat? If let me put it this way, Masi.
Right? I don't know.
Well, if you saw a fruit in front of you
Mm-hmm.
and I told you it was poisonous and it would kill you, and you're standing next to another person and they grab that fruit and eat it and they don't die, well, what would you assume?
You won't die. Or nothing will happen to you.
Yes. So she saw that it was good for food.
Mm.
Someone, in my opinion, ate the fruit. How else would she know that it is good for food? Because she was just told, you eat it, you die.
Mm. But
So
isn't that the serpent that was there probably ate it?
possibly, I mean, that's why I'm saying, like, if she says, oh, if you touch it, you die, and the serpent goes, hey, well, I touched it and I didn't die. Oh, and
Yeah.
by the way, here I am. I'm going to eat it. I'm not going to die. So naturally, she would say, that doesn't line up with what I was told. And now
Mm.
that she sees it's good for food, like all the other stuff, then she says she's thinking about it, right? Then it
Mm.
grows pleasant. That means over time she's like, oh, this is a positive thing.
Mm.
And that the tree was to be, she starts to desire the tree because why? She believes from the serpent that it'll make her wise.
Wise.
And so she eats of the fruit and then she goes to her husband.
Mm.
And so,
Interesting.
yeah. And here's the thing. Remember, they're told that they will die, right? We'll skip some of this stuff. And this is something that I think is interesting. Is the woman thou gavest me and commandest that she should remain with me, he gave me of the fruit of the tree and I did eat. I'm not saying that it's not potentially Adam blaming Eve,
Okay.
but what I think is also another potential interpretation is he's given the reason why he ate the fruit.
Mm.
Which now see here's a change in the narrative. If they were they right now realize the fruit's not going to kill him. Because why? He ate the fruit so he could stay with her. That's why he ate the fruit.
Interesting, because I was thinking, right? Because like I asked you, if Eve just ate it and Adam didn't, wouldn't Adam know that she wouldn't? Because the covenant is between him and God the Father. Wouldn't he feel, or was he, or was there something in it that Eve would have been cast and not him, but God
Well,
would rectify it? I don't know. That's what I'm thinking.
no, and that's what
Would
I'm
you?
saying. This could
Yeah.
be the whole reason why it was a mistake to not wait for God. Who
Mm,
else is out there telling them stuff? Well, so far we only know of the snake.
yeah.
So once you've been deceived, right? and say, oh, you didn't die. But how do we not know that the snake was like, well, now you're going to get kicked out. This is why you have to go get Adam. Adam has to eat, because if not, deception is a
Yeah.
very powerful thing. And once you start rolling downhill on
Mm.
deception, you build momentum. So the question now becomes, they now went from, we're both going to die. They eat of the fruit and they're not going to die. They know they're not going to die, but they obviously know they're going to get in trouble. And they think somehow, some way, they think or know that they're not going to die physically, but somebody's going to be kicked out.
Mm.
So to me, he's saying, the woman that thou gavest me, and you commanded that that she should remain with me. So he's trying to say, my motivation for eating is to try and stay with the woman that you commanded me to stay with. So I made a judgment call on my own, basically, because I thought she was under condemnation, which she may be or may not have been. But the scriptural record says it was only Adam who was commanded directly by God.
Mm.
So that's why he says he ate of the fruit. Okay. And then God asks the woman and says, why hast thou done this? And she says, the serpent beguiled me. So she finally realizes, oh, dude, I got duped, right? Like the serpent lied to me. But here's what's interesting. And I, the Lord God, said unto the serpent, thou mayest, because thou hast done this, you shall be cursed above all cattle, right? And above every beast of the field, and upon thy belly thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the serpent, and it's being compared to physical things.
Mm-hmm.
Above all cattle, above beast of the field. This is strange because these are things by this point are physical things.
Mm.
So I don't know exactly what this is. And then it talks about the enmity. And remember here, look, this is the interesting thing. It says, between thee and between thy seed and her seed. It doesn't talk about Adam. It's purely saying through the seed of the woman, which is why we're talking about the tree of life is a representation of God, and the feminine, because why? It's predicted here that it's going to come through the woman. Salvation will come through the woman.
Mm.
And that's why she's critical, right? She's introduced and viewed as the weakness, but she's actually the secret weapon that will deliver mercy to fallen man. And then says, unto the woman, and this is where it gets interesting. Unto the woman, I, the Lord God, said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception in sorrow. Thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And this is unto Adam, because thou hast hearkened. See, right here.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he's being punished. It's not that it says, oh, because you ate of the fruit. He's like, no, because you hearkened unto her.
Yeah.
Which why a lot of Jewish people say eventually Adam and Eve probably would have ate the fruit. But it was because he ate it under the direction of his wife and not under the direction of God. And has eaten of the fruit of the tree which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed shall be the earth or the ground for thy sake. In sorrow thou shalt eat all the days. Thorns and thistles. Then it says, by the sweat of thy brow. And here's where things get interesting. Number one, they were told you eat of the fruit, you die. Right? But that's not what happens when they eat of the fruit. They eat of the fruit and then they're told you're going to suffer. You're going to go blah, blah, like a whole list of suffering and sweat of your brow. Well, that doesn't seem to match what God said. This is why I say something else happened here. Because the deal of death is not matching what the punishment or what appears to be the punishment. And so this is why I say the eating of the fruit wasn't the fall to come here. The eating of the fruit, and in Doctrine and Covenants, God says that all my commandments are spiritual including the commandment I gave to your first parents in the garden. This is the lie that the serpent told Eve. They thought it, I believe they may have thought it was physical death, even though they didn't quite understand it, but it is spiritual death. And they technically could have lived forever, but they would have lived forever. This is where people read the scripture in 2nd Nephi, where Lehi is saying that if Adam and Eve didn't fall, they would have lived forever, right? And
Yeah.
never had children. I believe he's describing the state after they ate of the fruit and not describing the state before they ate of the fruit. Because after they eat of the fruit, they could have lived forever because it was a spiritual commandment with a spiritual death, which is why they didn't die when they ate the fruit. And so it is in that scenario that they realize, oh my gosh, well, it's spiritual death. I can't go back. I believe what God is saying here, he's not punishing them. He's telling them what life in the telestial world will be like. If you choose to go down, this is what that life will be like. There'll be suffering, and all that other stuff is what you're going to have. And you have to choose to do it. I'm not going to force you.
Yeah.
Because the deal was you die. I didn't tell you it would be
physical.
It was physical right away, right? And in Alma 42, it says that God did not see it expedient to save man physically. And that's why he appoints death. And then here's the thing. Look at that. And Adam called his wife Eve. This is after they eat of the fruit. Eve doesn't become Eve until after they eat of the fruit and after they are explained what the telestial world is like. Then she becomes Eve, because why? Now they understand she's going to have the children and all that other stuff. That's why Adam changes her and gives her a name.
Because it was just described as the woman.
The woman. So now, in a sense, Adam is starting to understand what Eve's role is and how she is actually going to be the greatest blessing now that they are going to be kicked out of the garden and go into the telestial world. And here's the other interesting thing here. So after Eve is given that name, okay, unto Adam and also his wife did I, the Lord God, make coats of skins and clothe them. What, in order to have coats of skins, what has to happen to the animal?
Kill him.
You got to kill him. So now that they've been told about all this stuff, they choose it. Eve is told you'll be the mother of all things. Then they're given the coats of skins. It represents protection for when they go to the telestial world. It will allow them to survive and to go through it, but it also becomes their death, because that's what the coats of skins represent. They represent, yes, protection from the telestial world, but it also will serve as your death as well.
Yeah.
But it's also because you die, because once they disobeyed them, everything must die. Because in the beginning, it was preordained that everything would die, and the earth, the heavens, and restart again. This, just like the woman is kind of ushers in the fall, she's also the solution of bringing in the savior. The same thing is the same for the animal skins. They give us the protection and the ability to go through the telestial world, but it also gives us the escape of death so that we don't have to get stuck in a world that had a beginning that will also have an end.
Correct.
Any questions, any thoughts on that?
No, just learned something new that I didn't know. Eve didn't receive her name until after partaking of the fruit and explaining the what life is going to be in the telestial world. So I thought that's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it, man. I know it's long. I'll probably have to cut this down to just about 2 hours. We'll cut certain parts out, but
No, no, it's all
There
good. It's all good.
there
It's
is
interesting.
so much to learn, man. We have so much in our scriptures. It's kind of crazy. And to think we have so much more to learn and experience. That's one of the things that I'm really excited about the gospel, and one of the reasons why I am firmly convinced that Joseph Smith was a prophet. You can't make this stuff up.
Mm,
Look at Jordan Peterson with all his education and all the
yeah,
exposure and all the people he had to talk to, and he still can't quite get to it, in my opinion.
yeah.
And then you look at what Joseph produced. You can't argue with the fruits here. Like
Mm,
the things and the patterns that are in the translations that Joseph Smith has done. I don't care who you are. You can have 50 Jordan Petersons and Michelangelos and
mm.
Leonardos.
You won't still get. Yeah.
That's impossible.
Mm,
Impossible. And I do believe that there's a reason why God provides the creation account in almost every dispensation he opens. And there's a reason why it's a big part of the endowment
mm,
that we have. And so this is why, like we talked about, in order to understand how we got here and why we're here and where we're going, we have to spend as much time to understand the beginning, the creation, and go from there. Any closing thoughts, Masi, before we close it for the
no,
day?
just along your thoughts. I'm grateful for the restored gospel. Grateful for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints because it gives me understanding enough of what is my purpose and my duties here on earth, and very blessed to have my wife to kind of understand because this is exactly what we were made for to with each other, and that promise of of blessings and more of like gathering experience because like I said earlier, this is just a segment of what we're gonna gather to go to the next journey. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean that's what I have to say. But
Yes. And then a thought came to my mind, Masi, when you were sharing your thoughts, because God says charity never faileth,
mm,
right? And I believe that this is what the plan brought to us that could not be achieved without our eternal companions, is they bring that charity piece. Apparently, you can do a lot of things with order and just, like Adam, organize, categorize. You can overcome a lot of things, but you cannot overcome a fall without charity. And that's what I
mm,
believe, the piece that our eternal companions bring to the table. And that, yes, as leaders we need to lead and we need to provide the order, but that order has limitations.
mm,
Just like, you know justice, we kind of we're like the arm of justice, but that has limitations because God didn't say justice overcomes all things. He
mm,
said charity.
charity.
Charity used under the proper conditions and under the direction of God the Father, that
Mm,
overcomes all things. And I think that's why God says that, the man and the woman together, is because 99% of the time justice is pretty adequate to
yeah,
get the work done. But in the unique and very difficult times,
correct.
charity is what makes the difference. That is the trump card. But you can't use your trump card all the time. If you use
Yes,
your trump card all the time, then it loses its value. And so the skill is in run your offense, your bread and butter, and then
correct.
for in the right time and in the right place, the ultimate trick play to get you the victory
Yeah.
is charity.
No, awesome point. No, awesome point too. Like you said with the charity, no, because not every, mostly everyone will follow that same pathway, but there's always going to be a good chunk that's not the majority that are going to need some special judgment, like what you said, but that's when the injection of the charity comes along to kind of get you there like everyone else. But yeah, definitely
Yeah.
agree. Because not
And
everyone follows the same way. Most of them will follow that same pathway, but not everyone. And it's a good chunk that people will need that extra assistance. And that's a good point that you
yeah,
brought up.
and I know we keep saying we're going to close, but there's another thought that I think is important. We're probably just going to have 2 episodes for this.
Okay.
I don't want people to come up with the assumption that we're trying to blame Eve or whatever, because we know that God knew it and he injected Eve with that purpose.
Mm,
And at the end of the day, we as children of God made our own choices. But this is the part that I think is really important. The fall and the choosing to come to the telestial world is really our opportunity. And I believe this is what God saw in the chaos, in the depths of quote unquote hell. He saw an opportunity for us to have experiences that are so rare and so unique that it is in all the creations. I don't know if they all have the opportunity that we have here. And
mm,
what do I mean by that is the reason why Jesus is so great is because he went below all things.
mm,
And the opportunity to come to this fallen world is to go down. Our greatness is in direct inverse of our ability to go down into the dark. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean let's go and break all the rules. What I mean is to go into the lowest fallen world and still do what's right, to
mm,
still fight as much as we can, even though we know we're going to fall short, to follow God and his
mm.
commandments. And that is the cross that Jesus asks us to carry, right?
Correct.
Jesus
Yeah.
carried his cross. And what does he ask his disciples?
To carry their
Carry
cross.
your cross,
Mm,
meaning carry it. Follow me, because the
mm,
suffering, and granted, I say this, but I'm not looking forward to suffering. I don't
mm.
look forward to challenges, but that is the opportunity that's in front of us
Correct.
as children of God in this fallen world. We have the opportunity to carry the cross, and our ability to submit ourselves as low as possible will eventually lead to us being raised up at the last day in accordance to our ability to submit ourselves.
Correct.
And with that being said, thank you, everybody. Aloha.
Aloha.